today we are going to be covering the two Cyberse decks, Maximum Ragnarok and Beyond Curiosity. First up is Maximum Ragnarok, and one of the main reasons you run this deck is for its consistency. Thanks to the skill, you are able to turn any of your monsters into double tribute material, and if you don't need to, you're also able to debuff the opponent's monster. Most commonly, you will turn one of your own monsters into a tribute and debuff an opponent at the same time. Our list, I think, is pretty standard. We run all of the Yggdrago pieces, Attitude Hydron, and some connector dogs. But there are a few cards worth noting. Most other players are running copies of Spectacles, whereas I am on Sigurd State Stole. And this is because I think there are a lot of monsters with 2500 attack that Mani would lose to. The most common one is Dragias, but even a deck like Servant of Dawn will sometimes struggle to clear a 2500 with the 2500 King Rex and the 2400 Mega Zalor. And there are also monsters like Tough Striker that aren't always going to be summoned with an Ameagle, especially if you have two bosses on board. Being able to have a double 2500 field is very strong. And then we also need to talk about the new card Chaos Femtron. This fixes one of the major problems with the deck, and that is just needing a little bit of extra juice to get things going. But Chaos Femtron does it all. It is a +1. It makes it easier to assemble your maximum, and it even puts 3 cards in the graveyard for Attitude Hydron. The only requirement is to have a Cyberse monster in the grave, and that is where Reset Runner comes in. You are able to actually make use of both parts of this effect in the deck. Sending the top card of your deck to the graveyard buffs Attitude by an extra 100, but shuffling your deck means you are able to return a maximum piece you don't need with Maximum Ragnarok to the bottom, and then shuffle it back in after you mill with an Attitude Hydron. We have a pretty standard spell and trap lineup. You could absolutely consider cutting out some of these particle accelerations for more monsters or another defensive trap. But this is the build I have been running with so far. It's also worth noting that not only does Chaos Femtron solve most of the deck's problems, but the other major problem with this deck has disappeared. Players are largely running Monster Reincarnation and Tribute to the Doomed over Shield and Sword, thanks to the rise of decks like Blue Eyes in the metagame, where Shield and Sword is not going to do very much, if anything, to them. So we are going to start off with this replay, and as you can see, I look completely bricked. 2 spell cards and 2 high-level monsters, but I draw a Reset Runner, a lone 1 tribute monster, and that means I'm able to bring out a Sigurd State Soul and have a 2400 body on board. My opponent does have a Ghost Cyclone, unfortunately, and they reveal they are on Harpies before getting in for a little bit of damage. But we draw into a couple of monsters of our own, and we already have an Attitude Hydron guaranteed from last turn. We burn for a little bit of damage, and then start to bring in over their monsters. They bring in another Harpy Lady Sisters and Trick Pigeon to get back the right side. And unfortunately, this means they are going to be able to clear. Talismanic Seal Array is used for a little bit of extra damage. But it is our turn now, and we summon out an Attitude Hydron. Then we use Maximum Ragnarok to debuff their monsters, and we get an exact lethal, thanks to the mills from Reset Runner earlier in the game. And next up, we have Beyond Curiosity. Note that the 36 card main deck is due to them adding the Picotrons and the Zeptrons into the deck for us. So most people would say Maximum Ragnarok is better, but this deck has some merits. You are fully able to take advantage of Attitude Hydron's effect. And if you have 8 monsters in the graveyard, you actually get to draw a card with Attitude, which is something that rarely comes up in my experience playing Magnum. This deck, not only is it able to deep draw for Yggdrago, but it's also able to bring out an Attitude Hydron with well over 4000 attack, and using the advantage generated by Hydron and Femtron, it's actually possible to summon out 2 bosses more often than you would think. The deck's goal is to draw and mill as much as possible in order to land these game-ending boss pushes. But don't get distracted by it. Zeptron and Yoctron are both -1s when you use them, and it's often better to, at some point, call it quits and actually play with the cards given in your hand. So here's an example of a game like that. You can see we open up with a Peacock Picotron. So we start milling with Reset Runner and filtering our hand with the Picotron. But then we get to the point where we have a maximum piece and 3 low-level monsters. So we just stop there, rather than trying to go for a Reset Runner for that 1 extra card. Our opponent brings in Dragias and blows up our back row. But this is their only monster, and they have no traps to protect them, which means we are going all in. We Reset Runner, we Picotron, and our deck was at 18, but after a bunch of milling and a bunch of drawing cards, we Monster Reincarnation for an Attribute Hydron, and we bring in 2 copies before drawing an additional 2 cards. It is turn 3. We have 7 cards in deck, and we have 2 monsters over 4,000 attack, OTKing our opponent. Here is another Beyond Curiosity game I wanted to show you. Our opponent goes first and sets a monster. We start the game. We have 33 cards in deck, but we start drawing, and we keep drawing, and we continue to draw even more. We go all the way down on our very first turn to 8 cards in the deck, and we bring out 2 huge Attribute Hydrons before getting in for 4,700. Our opponent is able to bring in a Mirror Innovator, but that is not enough, and their back row is not a trap card, so they immediately surrender. And we are going to cap things off with a second game of Maximum Ragnarok. Our opponent is up first, and they get a full house with 5 sets. We draw a pretty standard opening and decide to bring in our Attribute Hydron, returning Talismanic Seal Array to the bottom of the deck. But their Eternal Freeze gets rid of our monster. We swing in and reveal they are on Blue Eyes, and they bring in a copy of Torna before using Torero to switch us face down. But then they tribute Torna for another Torna, rather than tributing off the Torero, which seems a little bit weird to me. But that is not what is important here, as we have a set Monster Reincarnation, Chaos Femtron, mills and adds another card to our hand. Then, Monster Reincarnation adds the final maximum piece. We summon out Yggdrago. And here's the important Particle Acceleration. It destroys Tribute to the Doomed. And with that, their out to the maximum is gone. And they surrender, knowing they are going to be unlikely to be able to beat Yggdrago.